Hey guys, on today's episode, we're going to answer the pressing question of when to press your wine must. Now, this is yet another one of those winemaking questions that just doesn't have a simple answer. When to press your wine is going to be more of a stylistic thing, and it's also going to be a question of you reading those grapes and when do you think they need to be pressed. The wine that I'm working with today is a Malbec from Chile, and I'm doing it a little bit differently than I normally do. So normally I would let a red wine go fully dry before pressing, and that's a little bit of a stylistic thing for me because I really like to push for that big, bold red wine with a lot of aging potential, a lot of tannin. But at the same time, if you're gonna go, bone dry before pressing, you better have really good grapes. And these are pretty good grapes, but historically, my Chilean wines will always get a little bit on the green side. So I want to press just a little bit earlier than bone dry so that I'm not extracting all those green pyrazines that are more alcohol soluble than water soluble. So let's say if you were to press bone dry, one easy indicator that you're dry is your grape cap of skins that's normally rising up above the top of the wine eventually will stop rising. The grapes will stop filling with CO2. The juice will get lighter and lighter as the sugar goes away. So if you were to measure the specific gravity, you might get all the way down to something like 0.993, whereas you might have started at something like 1.1 or 1.11. So that wine is actually a lot lighter. It's floating up and those berries are sinking down. So usually I'll just do a visual indicator, but this particular wine I measured with a hydrometer, and we're at about 0.995, or if you work in bricks, negative 1.75, negative 2. And those numbers are pretty darn close to dry, but it's still bubbling. I'm still getting the cap coming up, so it's got a little bit longer to go. I've had this wine on the skins for about 9 days, which again is on the low end for me, but because it could have a tendency to go a little herbaceous, I'm going to get it off those skins, get it in the carboy, let it finish up that last 1 or 2 days in the carboy, and then I'll get it off the gross lees and into a fresh carboy where it can undergo malolactic fermentation. If you want the best color extraction and the most intense flavor extraction, skin time is going to be one of the really big ways to achieve that. Another one's going to be temperature, but on some of my bigger reds, what I'll actually do is I'll do a cold soak where I chill the must after crushing. I chill it for anywhere from 2 to 3 days, and then I ferment. And I'll let that fermentation spike in temperature at the beginning, anywhere from 80 degrees to high 80s, and extract all that fruity stuff that's coming out of those skins. And then as the fermentation goes on, I'll let the temperature gradually cool down. The flavors that you want are more water soluble. The flavors that you usually don't want to be overpowering are going to be the alcohol soluble ones, like the green tannins. So as it goes on, I'll let the temperature kind of drift down to the mid to low 70s. And I can sometimes extend a fermentation out to as long as 17, 18, 19, 20 days. And you can get a big time, bold, dark red, powerful wine by doing that. So if you've got really good grapes, you've got, everything looks extremely healthy. The fermentation is coming along healthy. You're not getting any, odd smells. You're not getting a lot of hydrogen sulfide or I mean, even worse, you could actually get a little bit of acetic acid or vinegar smell during fermentation. If everything's staying healthy, you can keep that open top fermentation going. I'd like to be able to tell you that there's something like press on day 7 or press on day 10. And I just read a professional winemaker in Winemaking magazine. He says he always presses on day 10. Now he's probably got a pretty controlled environment. He's getting the same grapes from the same vineyard every year. They're probably running the same fermentation temperature profile. And maybe they're pretty consistent, but rather than doing like what someone might say a set day, I would encourage you to do something more along the lines of the press, at bone dry, press at something like 1.000 specific gravity or 0 degrees Brix on your hydrometer. Or if you want to make a little bit of a lighter red wine, I'll press as high as like 1.020 specific gravity or 4 or 5 degrees Brix, and get it off the seeds and skins just a little early. And you might make a crowd pleaser, but you're not going to necessarily make a big time powerhouse wine doing that. It might also lack a little bit in color. So I hope this helped you at your pressing decision. While we're here at the wine press, I'll give you just a couple more tips when you're using a basket press like this. You really don't need to put any sort of cheesecloth or mesh in here. You're not going to get a lot of seeds or skins coming through as long as you got a nice tight press. I will run it through a strainer. I mean, you can see there's really just not a lot that has got away here, other than just some little bit of pulp residue. I always like to wear a shirt that I either don't care about or is the color of the wine that I'm working with, because as you start to press with a press like this, you can get some rogue, super soaker jet streams of wine that might squirt like 20 feet across the room. So also don't use something like this in your living room. If you can do it outside, if you can do it in a garage, if you can do it in a basement, those are all pretty good places. I like to put a carboy underneath my press and run a funnel into it. Of course, we're talking about pretty small batches here. I also like to prop up the back leg of my press by about a ½ inch, just to lean it a little bit, make sure everything kind of runs to the front. And I also like to screw it down with just some drywall screws to whatever table or workbench that I'm using, because the last thing you want when you really start working the ratchet on this press is for that thing to fall off and smash your carboy or whatever, which I've never had happen, but I could easily see how something like that could happen. As you're pressing, I filled this basically to the top. What I'll do now is I'll kind of work it down, and then I'll put my wood plates in and start pressing until that cake really compresses, and pull the cake and do it again. And do that as many times as you need. This is a pretty small press, but I can run quite a bit of wine through it. The most I've ever run in one occasion was like 700 pounds of must. And that's probably 8 runs through this. So it's a lot, but it can be done. If you want to be a little bit more efficient with your pressing, you can buy some rice hulls. They usually have it at the winemaking supply shop or at wherever you get your wine supplies online. And that'll just create a little bit of space to allow that wine to travel through the grape skins. I don't really use them, honestly, because for the 2 cups of wine that I'm losing, like the cost of these rice hulls just isn't really worth it. If you had a source, it'd be different. Once you get your wine into your carboy or whatever vessel you're putting it in. In my case, like I said, I'm gonna let it finish up. So I'm gonna kind of churn the lees for a couple days until it stops fermenting, and then I'm gonna let that pile of gross lees settle to the bottom and rack it off. And that's a really, really important step. There are people that will age on the lees, but when they age on the lees, they're not aging on the gross lees, they're aging on the fine lees. Now the gross lees are the pile of thick sediment that comes from pressing a pulp like this. And if you leave the wine on those gross lees, all kinds of bad things can happen. There's a lot of like acetobacter, some bad bacteria that could make like vinegar, nail polish remover smell, some bad stuff happen. So get it off those gross lees. You really only want a couple days on those at most. And if you do all that stuff, at the very least, you should make a pretty clean wine. And as time goes on, you'll learn what style works best for you. And sometimes you might not really just have a style. Like what I do is I tailor my style to the grapes that I have. If I think the grapes are going to make a better big time Cabernet Sauvignon powerhouse, I'll try to do that. If I think this will be more of a, medium bodied wine for maybe someone who's a little bit newer to wine drinking, I'll do that as well. And by having all these options in your cellar, you now have more blending options. So when you are getting ready to bottle, you can do a little bit more creative blending to get that wine tuned in just right. So I might have went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but hopefully, again, this will help you. If you have any questions, post them in the comments section, and be sure to click the subscribe button if you haven't yet subscribed to the Home Winemaking channel, and check out my website, smartwinemaking.com. Thanks for watching.